Welcome to the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare module, Educational Disengagement Among Youth Experiencing Homelessness and Unstable Housing. The research that is presented in this module is brought to you through the funding and support of the Kresge Foundation, Hennepin County Attorney's Office, the School of Social Work and College of Education and Human Development, and the Minnesota Department of Human Services, Children and Family Services Division. A multidisciplinary team of researchers conducted this study, which include Christine Peischer, the principal investigator and director of research and evaluation at the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare at the University of Minnesota, Yanqin Zhang, assistant professor at the Department of Psychological and Quantitative Foundations at the University of Iowa, and Dunia Dadi, YouthLink graduate research assistant and narrator of this module. In this module, we are going to first provide background information by describing what youth homelessness is, common causes of youth homelessness, prevalence of youth homelessness across the country and in the state of Minnesota, the impact of youth homelessness, as well as factors that contribute to homelessness among youth and groups of youth who are most affected. After providing background information, we will discuss the literature on educational outcomes among youth experiencing homelessness and gaps in the literature that still remain in understanding the patterns of educational disengagement among youth who experience homelessness and unstable housing. We will also discuss results from our research investigating the relationship between youth homelessness and educational disengagement as measured by dropping out of school and attending school less than 90% of the time. We will conclude this module with key takeaways from the study and strategies to support youth experiencing homelessness. The goal of this module is to help child welfare and other affiliated professionals who encounter youth experiencing homelessness to better understand the nature of youth homelessness in Minnesota, as well as services that can support youth who are experiencing homelessness, especially those that may help young people stay connected to and achieve in school settings. We hope that the information provided in this module helps you reflect on the ways to intervene and disrupt negative outcomes for youth experiencing homelessness. You may be wondering how exactly youth homelessness is defined. The answer, unfortunately, is that homelessness is defined in a few different ways, depending on which agency is involved with the young person. Federal definitions and key terms are often used when talking about runaway youth and youth experiencing homelessness. Regardless of the definition that we use, it's important to note that youth homelessness typically refers to homelessness among youth, people aged approximately 16 to 24 years old. Though this can vary depending on the definition, for example, oftentimes the information being collected includes a much larger age range than we would ascribe to youth, and other times the age range may get truncated because older youth are out of the estimates, such as the case for K through 12 student homelessness. According to the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, youth homelessness is defined as individuals who are not more than 21 years of age, for whom it is not possible to live in a safe environment with a relative and who have no other safe alternative living arrangement. This definition includes only those youth who are unaccompanied by families or caregivers. In the educational realm, the main focus of this module, the U.S. Department of Education uses the definition provided by the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which defines homelessness as follows. Homeless children and youth are individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. The term includes children and youth under age 22 who share the housing of other persons due to the loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, are living in emergency or transitional shelters, or are abandoned in hospitals. Children living in motels, hotels, trailers, or campgrounds are considered homeless if they are living there because they have nowhere else to stay. The definition also includes youth who have a primary nighttime residence that is not meant for regular sleeping accommodations, as well as youth who live in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings. Migratory children will also qualify if they live in any of the circumstances described above. Unoccupied, unaccompanied youth who have run away or been thrown out, and as a result are living in shelters, on the street, or moving between friends or relatives, are also considered homeless under this definition. Furthermore, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, defines youth homelessness for their program under the McKinney-Vento definition. HUD's point-in-time count is a record of the number of individuals using temporary shelter or living in a place not meant for human habitation on a single night. Unlike the U.S. Department of Education count of students experiencing homelessness, HUD does not account for youth living in double-up or highly mobile housing arrangements, usually underestimating the prevalence of youth experiencing homelessness. This is why the U.S. Department of Education count is considered a more inclusive definition, in contrast to the HUD definition. Although by definition all students identified in HUD should qualify as homeless by the U.S. Department of Education, there are students who fail to be identified and thus do not receive supportive services such as free lunch and transportation accommodations that they're eligible for. This suggests that more robust and better coordinated housing supports are necessary for improving outcomes for all students experiencing homelessness, regardless of how the students are initially identified. The basic cause of youth homelessness is overwhelmingly poverty. Problems like poverty are often generational, meaning that they get passed down from parent to child. In fact, in Minnesota, 30% of parents experiencing homelessness and 43% of parents experiencing homelessness with a child ages 0 through 5 only had themselves first experienced homelessness as a child. Younger youth experience homelessness primarily through family homelessness. Families experiencing homelessness account for 37% of the overall homelessness population and 50% of the sheltered population. Homelessness among unaccompanied youth, which are youth not in the custody of a parent or caregiver, is most commonly caused by severe family dysfunction and poverty. However, underlying causes include lack of employment or an income sufficient to pay for adequate housing, as well as a shortage of affordable housing in the community. Other factors associated with youth homelessness include domestic abuse and neglect. In fact, these are two of the major reasons why young people leave home. Several studies show that over half of all youth experiencing homelessness have experienced some form of sexual, physical, or emotional abuse. In addition, studies have also found significant overlap between homeless youth and youth involved in the child welfare system. Youth experiencing homelessness are also more likely to struggle with mental health challenges and are less likely to access treatment for these challenges than their peers, creating a cascading series of events that increase their risk for becoming chronically homeless. One of the first things you might be asking yourself is, how common is youth homelessness? The answer to this question is not as straightforward as we might hope because estimates vary pretty widely depending on who is collecting the information. A lot of the information we have on youth homelessness comes from the educational realm, where we're looking specifically at student homelessness. According to the National Center for Homeless Education, about 1.25 million students experienced homelessness at some point during the 2019 to 2020 school year nationwide. When compared to the overall number of students, students experiencing homelessness accounted for 2.5% of all students enrolled in public schools. Since 2008, the number of students experiencing homelessness identified by public schools each year has increased by more than 84%, from approximately 680,000 to 2.25 million students in 2019. Data specific to Minnesota typically come from Wilder Research. In 2018, an estimated 13,300 Minnesota youth experienced homelessness. Over the course of a year, on any given night in the state of Minnesota, more than 6,000 unaccompanied youth experience homelessness. Of these youth, nearly half have been homeless for more than a year. Homelessness disproportionately affects some communities more than others. Information on the race and ethnicity of students experiencing homelessness was reported by states and collected by the National Center for Education for the 2019 to 2020 school year. According to the data, Black and African American students accounted for 15% of the overall student body, but 27% of students experiencing homelessness. In fact, 4.4% of all Black and African American students experienced homelessness in this year, a higher rate than any other race and ethnicity, followed by American Indian or Native American students. American Indian or Native American students accounted for 1% of the student population. However, they comprised of 1.6% of students experiencing homelessness. And nearly 4% of all American Indian or Native American students experienced homelessness for the 2019 to 2020 school year. With the exception of students who identified as Asian, students of color were overrepresented among students experiencing homelessness. Both Asian and white students were underrepresented. While white students accounted for 46% of all students enrolled in public schools, they represented only 26% of students experiencing homelessness. National racial disparities trends among youth experiencing homelessness are also consistent with the data found in Minnesota. According to the 2018 Wilder Minnesota Homeless Study, of the 13,300 Minnesota youth experiencing homelessness over the course of a year, 35% were Black or African American youth, who only make up 9% of the Minnesota population. And 15% of youth experiencing homelessness are Native American youth, who only make up 1% of the Minnesota population. When combined, Black and Native American youth make up half of over all youth homelessness in Minnesota. The prevalence of homelessness and housing instability is also disproportionately higher among youth that identify as LGBTQ, where LGBTQ youth of color are at elevated risk than white LGBTQ youth. The top causes of homelessness among LGBTQ youth include family rejection resulting from sexual orientation or gender identity, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, aging out of the foster care system, and financial and emotional neglect. Youth with cognitive disabilities are also more likely to become homeless, and rates of cognitive disabilities are higher among the homeless population than the population in general. Youth with experiences of child protection involvement have higher likelihood of homelessness and vice versa. Families involved with the child welfare system are disproportionately poor and lack resources for housing stability. The most common connection between homelessness and child protection involvement is when youth exit foster care either by aging out or leaving the system voluntarily. Despite the lack of adequate educational, financial, and emotional stability, youth in out of home care are expected to make a successful transition to living on their own. As the most vulnerable of all high risk populations, it is not surprising that former out of home care youth are significantly overrepresented among the homeless. Youth homelessness is associated with poor developmental outcomes in multiple areas. Youth experiencing homelessness struggle with high rates of mental health issues. In fact, they have a 3 times higher rate of major depression, conduct disorder, and PTSD than non homeless youth. Youth experiencing homelessness are also significantly more likely to use substances such as marijuana, crack cocaine, and other harmful substances than other youth. Youth struggling with homelessness and unstable housing have higher rates of victimization, delinquency, and incarceration than their peers. In one study, researchers found that among runaway youth and youth experiencing homelessness in 11 United States cities, nearly 44% had stayed in a jail, prison, or juvenile detention center. 78% have had at least one interaction with the police at some point in their life, and nearly 62% had been arrested at least once. Rates of sexual assault are 2 to 3 times higher among youth experiencing homelessness than those of the general youth population. Also, due to the common practice of using transactional sex to meet basic needs, youth experiencing homelessness deal with high rates of HIV and sexually transmitted illnesses, prostitution, and teen pregnancy. The educational and employment prospects of youth are also highly affected by experiences of homelessness. Young people experiencing homelessness tend to struggle with chronic school absences, low grades, low assessment and test scores, and unmet special needs, leading to a lack of high school diploma, difficulties finding employment, and reliance on public forms of support to make ends meet. This becomes a vicious cycle as young people search for opportunities to improve their well being and that for their families in the future. As noted in the last slide, the absence of a stable living environment has a devastating impact on educational outcomes for youth. Research shows for many students who are homeless, not having the proper school records often leads to incorrect classroom placement. Lack of access to medical records, immunization records, previous school transcripts, proof of residency are some of the barriers to students being placed efficiently and appropriately within school districts. When students change schools frequently, it is difficult for educators to correctly identify their needs and ensure educational continuity. Access to resources is a gigantic barrier for youth experiencing homelessness. Lack of transportation is an obstacle that prevents many youth experiencing homelessness from participating in educational programs. Due to economic hardships, families and households of youth may also not be able to afford basic school supplies for youth to efficiently complete homework and acquire uniforms or clothing for school. Other conditions associated with experiences of homelessness further compound these barriers. A lack of a home and struggling to make ends meet can result in poor health, fatigue, and hunger, which adversely impacts students' focus and performance in school. Experiences of trauma are associated with emotional and mental health issues, which makes school attendance and engagement challenging. Stress and trauma directly related to the experience of homelessness can also elevate young people's risk of developing mental health issues and make school attendance and engagement challenging for youth. All these barriers combined with lack of support from the school district and our community can often prevent students experiencing homelessness from participating in educational programming, leading to inequitable experiences for young people with lifelong consequences. Previous research has shown a correlation between youth homelessness and educational disengagement by looking at outcomes such as school absences and dropout rates. While multiple studies have examined school engagement patterns of homeless and unstably housed youth, most have not established a temporal relationship between the two, therefore adding ambiguity to whether educational disengagement is a catalyst to homelessness or vice versa. In addition, many studies lack a comparable and rigorously designed comparison group that provides accurate and meaningful insight about differences in educational disengagement of youth experiencing homelessness as compared to their non homeless peers. These gaps in research need to be addressed for more effective services and supports to be leveraged. This brings us to the purpose of our current study. Through funding by the Kresge Foundation, Hennepin County, and the University of Minnesota, and through a partnership with YouthLink, the largest youth drop-in center in Minneapolis, our research team has been working to address the research gaps I just described. We set out to answer the following research questions. What are the characteristics of youth who experience homelessness? How do the patterns of educational disengagement differ for youth experiencing homelessness as compared to their peers? Does experiencing homelessness and or unstable housing increase educational disengagement for youth? YouthLink is Minneapolis's largest nonprofit drop-in center for youth at risk of or experiencing homelessness located in downtown Minneapolis. But it's more than a drop-in center. YouthLink provides a variety of basic and transformational services to approximately 2,000 unaccompanied youth ages 16 to 24 experiencing homelessness each year, making them an excellent community partner in this research study. This study was conducted through the Minnesota Linking Information for Kids, or MinLink project. MinLink is an integrated data system housed at the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare in the University of Minnesota's School of Social Work. This project allows researchers to link data from multiple state and local agencies in order to answer complex questions about Minnesota youth. Examples of data sources integrated at MinLink include data from the Minnesota Departments of Education, Human Services, and Corrections. By using linking software to connect records of youth served by multiple systems, MinLink researchers can match student data across systems and examine how services received in one area impact outcomes in another. We began our research by selecting a sample of youth who experienced homelessness or unstable housing. We identified these youth as youth who received services from YouthLink in 2011 and were included as part of a previous study about the experiences and outcomes of youth. For the current study, we linked data from YouthLink to data in other systems, including records from the Minnesota Department of Education, Human Services, Hennepin County Shelter Data, and the Homeless Management Information System using probabilistic and hand matching methods. The sample was restricted to 764 youth after excluding youth who experienced homelessness or unstable housing after educational disengagement, were younger than 16 years old or older than 24 years old at their last school enrollment year, or had less than 2 years of school enrollment on record. A comparison group of similar youth who did not experience homelessness was identified. We matched this comparison group on age, gender, race, ethnicity, receipt of 2 or more years of free reduced lunch, receipt of children's mental health case management services, involvement in child protection services, and experienced out of home placement using propensity score matching methods. For this study, we looked at two key educational disengagement outcomes of interest. First, we looked at attendance rates that dropped below 90% during a full-time enrollment record. Second, we looked at dropout rates, which included failure to graduate for any reason. The majority, 64%, of the homeless and unstably housed cohort was female. 82% identified as Black or African American. Approximately half experienced child protection involvement and out of home placement or received special education services, and nearly all had 2 or more years of free or reduced price lunch, a marker of family poverty. For our study, we first assessed low attendance and dropout patterns among students experiencing homelessness and/or unstable housing as compared to their peers. As you can see in Figure 1, the proportion of youth with low attendance was much higher for students experiencing homelessness. These patterns were similar when we looked at proportion of youth that dropped out of high school, as you can see in Figure 2. In fact, the difference between educational disengagement patterns for youth experiencing homelessness and/or unstable housing and their peers was approximately 20%. 91% versus 73% had low attendance, and 66% versus 44% dropped out. In Figure 3, our Venn diagram shows that 2/3 of youth experiencing homelessness and/or unstable housing had low attendance and dropped out, as compared to less than half of their peers. Sadly, over 96% of youth experiencing homelessness and/or unstable housing had some form of educational disengagement, compared to 80% of their peers. Lastly, we examined the effect of homelessness and/or unstable housing on the likelihood of low attendance and dropping out. We saw that youth that experienced homelessness or were unstably housed had 4 times greater odds of having low attendance compared to their peers. We also found a significant inverse relationship between age and low attendance, which means as age increases, the odds of low attendance decreases, meaning that older youth are less likely to attend school less than 90% of the time. Also, youth who have ever received child mental health services or experienced CPS involvement were approximately 2 to 3 times more likely to have low attendance after adjusting for all other control variables. As for the effect of homelessness on dropping out, the odds of dropping out were 2.5 times greater among youth who experience homelessness and/or unstable housing than their peers. Receiving special education services decreased the odds of dropping out by 38%, but experiencing out of home care increased the odds of dropping out by 81%. Key takeaways from this study include finding a significant relationship between low attendance and dropout outcomes and youth experiences of homelessness. Compared to their stably housed peers, youth who experience homelessness and/or housing instability were more likely to occur school absences, drop out of high school without earning a diploma, and experience both outcomes of educational disengagement. Previous literature has also found that students who experience homelessness have higher rates of difficulty in the school setting than non homeless children. We can help address the issue of educational disengagement among youth experiencing homelessness by implementing educational engagement strategies that are supported by evidence to be effective, such as provide flexibility with school assignments, including deadlines and needed supplies, provide free access to meals, create individualized plans for students with counselors to address unique needs. We can also support the needs of youth experiencing homelessness by connecting them and their families, when appropriate, to local supportive services. Strong collaborations among housing providers, school systems, and social services are necessary to implement strategies that improve school attendance and serve as an early warning to educators when a student's absences are associated with homelessness. Most importantly, youth experiencing homelessness can benefit greatly by the implementation of policies that are targeted to their unique needs and circumstances, particularly legislation that can provide academic support, counseling, and other interventions to promote academic stability, as well as overall housing stability and supports to youth and their families, is critical. To learn more about youth homelessness, visit the CASHU website under Research and Community Engagement, MinLink, and then Brief Reports. You will find a variety of research briefs that highlight the experiences and outcomes of youth homelessness. Here listed are 7 briefs that focus on youth homelessness, and 5 more briefs will be developed soon, including a research brief that describes the findings in this module. This project would not be possible without the support of a wide array of individuals and organizations. While it would be impossible to name every person that contributed to this effort, we would like to publicly thank our funders, Kresge Foundation, Hennepin County Attorney's Office, the School of Social Work and College of Education and Human Development, and the Minnesota Department of Human Services, Children and Family Services Division. The YouthLink staff, and our data partners YouthLink, Institute for Community Alliances, Hennepin County Health and Human Services, and the Minnesota Departments of Education and Human Services. We would also like to thank our research colleagues working in partnership to address issues facing youth experiencing homelessness. Doctors Timothy Zoll, Stephen Foldis, Kirsten Hall-Long, Maura Shramko, Nina Alessi, Sehun Hong, and Miss Caitlin Warburton and Amy Nearin.